Someone asked whether I have any thoughts on the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. Okay, I think it's definitely authentic. There's many arguments that kind of people make for its authenticity. To me, there are two arguments which really strike me, and which people really just kind of hem and haw about if they want to argue that it's not authentic. Um, First one is that Jesus is nailed through the wrists on the Shroud of Turin. Now, before anyone made this argument, when I saw the Shroud of Turin for the first time, and I saw that, immediately I knew that this was really weird if it was a medieval forgery, because there just aren't medieval images of Jesus where he's nailed through the wrist. But that is historically accurate. That is how he would have been nailed through the wrist. That's how he would have been nailed to the cross. Second of all, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. The Sudarium of Oviedo is the face cloth of Jesus. So the Gospels mention that Jesus has a burial cloth and a face cloth. Some people have argued against the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin by saying, well, Jesus' face is there, but we know he had a separate face cloth. Well, it seems rather that the face cloth was placed on top of the burial cloth. And in fact, the same image that is on the face of the shroud is on the Sudarium of Oviedo. But these things are only related to each other. The relation to each other has only been seen in the relatively modern world, where we're able to look at pictures of both at once. But these two relics have very distinct and independent histories. They go to different places, different people venerate them. They have a very distinct history, and yet they seem to be intrinsically related to each other. And it's not something that people have called attention to until very, very recently. So if the shroud is a forgery, the same person must have forged the Sudarium and then planted it in a different region of Christendom and not told anybody. He told the shroud about that he'd done the same thing in this other fake relic. So it's a question of what's the simplest explanation here. You have to get very complicated in order to explain how precisely this was produced with the qualities that it has, if it is not, in fact, the authentic burial shroud of Jesus. Also, most painted images will not, when they're put into a computer, produce a genuine three-dimensional image, because the proportions of painting are not going to be exactly appropriate if you try to turn it into 3 dimensions, because it was produced in 2 dimensions. If you produce something in 2 dimensions and try to transfer it into 3 dimensions, it won't come out very well. If you do the reverse, it can work. So the question is, if the shroud is authentic, it starts as a 3-dimensional image, because it starts as the actual body of Jesus, and then it's turned into a 2-dimensional image. But if the shroud is not authentic, it starts as a 2-dimensional image, because it's being produced by hand on a 2-dimensional surface. So the question is, does the shroud work better as something which begins as a 3-dimensional or a 2-dimensional image, and it works as a 3-dimensional image? You can produce a 3-dimensional projection of the person who's depicted on the shroud. And so that makes by far the most sense if this is actually an the authentic burial shroud of Jesus.